Tonight, the day after the disaster, we mourn and remember the 7 heroes from the shuttle Columbia. And we keep asking why. Joining me in this hour, Hugh Downs, former 2020 co-anchor who covered the space program for ABC. From their home in Virginia, Paul and Dorothy Brown, parents of Columbia mission specialist David Brown. At the Johnson Space Center in Houston, CBS News correspondent Bill Harwood. In Washington, NASA Associate Administrator Bill Reedy, a former astronaut, now day-to-day manager for space shuttle flights. In Atlanta, Randy Avera, 14 years a NASA engineer. He investigated the Challenger crash and was at the Columbia launch. In Washington, John Logsdon, director of the Space Policy Institute. And with some insight on healing, in San Antonio, Texas, Max Lucado, minister at the Oak Hills Church of Christ. And in Houston, Reverend David Fannin, senior pastor at Nassau Bay Baptist Church, right across from the Johnson Space Center. All next on a special edition of Larry King Weekend. Hugh Downs is going to serve as a co-host tonight. He'll be firing questions as our guest as well. Not that he needs credentials, but you as chairman of the Board of Governors of the National Space Society. Among the members are Arthur C. Clarke and Tom Hanks and Tom Cruise. He's covered launches for NBC and ABC of several Apollo missions and shuttle missions, and a former advisor to NASA as well. With us at the Johnson Space Center in Houston is Bill Harwood of CBS News. He writes, edits, and maintains CBS News Space Place on the web. Been a journalist covering NASA for 20 years. Bill Reedy is a veteran astronaut. He's in Washington. He's flown on 3 space flights, an associate NASA administrator for Office of Space Flight. What, Bill Reedy, we'll start with you. What do we definitely know?
Well, at this point, you realize that it's very close to the event. And I'd like first to start out by saying, expressing NASA's deepest sympathies to the Browns, recognizing that just this horrible, horrible tragedy. We will find out what happened, we'll get to the bottom of it, and we'll fix it, and then we'll get back to returning to flight. But what we know at this point, let me tell you where we have been. We've deployed teams in the field. They're on station right now. They're searching for any little clue we positively can identify as part of the wreckage, understanding that it was spread out over quite a distance. And we've had tremendous cooperation across the federal government, state and local agencies, FEMA, the EPA, and now we even have National Guard on scene helping us identify wreckage and collect it. Private citizens have also pitched in, and I'd like to commend them for having identified the pieces of wreckage to the local authorities so that we can make sure that we tag them, locate them, because every little piece of the puzzle will help us unravel what happened yesterday.
Gotcha. Bill Harwood, how cooperative is NASA being repertorially?
You know, it's really been striking. I covered the Challenger accident back in 1986, and a policy of strict no comment was implemented in the wake of that disaster. And I have to tell you, Larry, the policy NASA's implemented in the wake of Columbia's loss, tragic as it was, is one of remarkable openness. They've really shared the data that they have to this point with us and through us to the public. And I have to say, I think it's a very positive step. It reassures the public that NASA's on the right track. It lets them follow along in the investigation a little bit, because I think that's part of this, Larry. You know, the shuttle, the space program is really part of America's image of itself. And when there's something bad like this happens, to be able to participate in it, even from a distance, to follow and find out what went wrong with this program is a valuable thing. And they've been remarkably open. I've been very impressed.
Let me ask what you think, and I could ask Bill Reedy also. What do you think, is there any kind of on cause, anything that's definitely ruled out, like design flaw, pilot error, anything like that, that is not the case? That
would be for both of you. We'll start with Bill Reedy and then Bill Harwood. Bill?
No, I don't think any... I'm sorry. Is it to me or to Bill Reedy, Larry?
Bill Reedy first and then Bill Harwood.
Well, thank you. First of all, I think one of the things that we can rule out is pilot error. You know, clearly we won't rule out anything else because we're collecting all the evidence and sifting through it. But I can say right now that the crew was ultra-professional, highly trained. There was no evidence of anything at all during the downlink that would indicate that there was any kind of crew involvement in this incident. But we will not rule out anything other wise in terms of investigating the evidence that we have. This is a public space program. It's always been public. We owe it to the public to disclose whatever it is that we have. To that end, we're establishing twice-a-day press briefings, one here at headquarters and one down at the Johnson Space Center each day. And whatever it is that we uncover, we will disclose and share with the media. We want to make sure that we're leaning forward on this, making sure that the public trust that has been invested in us is well placed.
Do you have a rough idea of a timetable for getting this, knowing exactly what took place?
Well, obviously we're trying to build what we call the fault tree in the business, and that is try and figure out all the possible things that might have gone wrong, and then what we do is work backwards and by process of elimination rule out those things that could not have been the causal factor. We'll take however long it takes to get to the bottom of this, to identify the problem.
From a reporting standpoint, how difficult a story is this?
Well, it's always tough, Larry, when you see a human tragedy of this magnitude and scale that affects something as big as a space program. It's difficult to cover in that, as you're aware, and what Mr. Reedy is talking about, the data comes in slowly. That's of necessity. I completely agree with him that in the early stages of an investigation like this, it's an extraordinarily complex picture. You know, people lose sight of the complexity of the space shuttle. Just because it's flown a lot doesn't mean it's something that's simple. There's hundreds and hundreds of data points that come down in real time. They have to go back through that, as he said, and it just takes time. You know, reporters obviously are never as patient as other people might want us to be, but that's just the nature of this business, and I think it's going to take a little while to fully get to the bottom of it, and no one wants to come up with a false conclusion that turns out not to be true later.
Bill Reedy, you've flown 3 missions. Were you worried about re-entry?
Well, there isn't anything we can take for granted in spaceflight. There's tremendous risk still involved in exploring space, and I think everyone that's professionally involved in this business knows that. I think the public, though, perhaps, because we have been so successful for so long since Challenger, because we have put in so many safety upgrades into the vehicle, because we have been so successful building the International Space Station, servicing the Hubble, and doing all those marvelous things that we do and making them look easy, has probably led the public to the conclusion that this is risk-free. And it's far from it. This is every bit as risky as doing experimental test flying like I used to do in the United States Navy.
You know, one of the things I've wondered, and I haven't heard it commented on recently, if the crew had known in advance that re-entry was going to be impossible, would it have been at all possible to make it to the space station? Even if they weren't trained in docking, I would imagine something of that could have been accomplished. Or would that have not been an option?
Well, that's an interesting thought. First of all, we're not even sure what has happened at this point, so it's a hypothetical, but the orbits were vastly different. The orbit that this particular flight was in was inclined at 40 degrees to the equator. The space station flies at 51.6, so they're not even coincident in terms of orbit. So it really, and it also didn't have a docking mechanism on this particular flight, so it really was not a possibility. An academic situation and hypothetical, too, in that we really don't know what's happened at this point.
Bill Reedy, thanks for joining us. We'll be calling on you again. Bill Harwood will remain with us, and we'll be joined by Randy Avera and John Loxton. And then we'll meet the Browns' parents who lost their son in this tragedy yesterday. We'll be right back.